May Padmasambhava, who is the embodiment of benevolence of all Buddhas and the one singly heroic in destroying the misfortunes of the degenerate age, along with his line of saints, bless your majesty. This is a prayer written on the occasion when the king of Bhutan met Songtsen Gampo. Today we will be reading from one history on His Holiness's the 13th Dalai Lama's exile in Mongolia in honor of Guru Rinpoche Day, the last one of 2023. I found this fascinating excerpt online, and I will just read from that on Google Books. And here you can see the pencil portrait of the 13th Dalai Lama. On August 3rd, 1904, a large British expedition army led by Colonel Francis Younghusband marched into Lhasa with an ease that shocked even him. He was probably expecting a more bloody battle than at Gyantse, where over 1,000 poorly armed Tibetans were killed. He was met by Yotai, one Mongolian bannerman, the Qing imperial resident minister or Amban of Tibet. But the 13th Dalai Lama, the highest ecclesiastical leader of Tibet, who had taken a tough position rejecting a negotiated settlement with the British, was nowhere to be seen. Nobody knew where he was, to the embarrassment of both the British commander and the Qing Amban. Both of them wanted a quick end to this confrontation, but for different reasons. But where was he? After almost 3 weeks of futile searching, the infuriated Amban sent a telegram to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing on 21st August 1904, informing them that the Dalai Lama had disappeared on the night of 27th July, and a thorough investigation of all the monks had yielded no clues as to his whereabouts. Blaming the Dalai Lama for all the troubles in Tibet, the Amban proposed that he be stripped of his title as a punishment for abandoning Lhasa, and especially the Potala Palace, where the emperor's portrait was kept. This was, he said, to cleanse the barbarian border official area of service in order to apologize to the neighboring state. Furthermore, he asked that the Dalai Lama be replaced by the ninth Panchen Lama as the leader of the Yellow School of Tibetan Buddhism. The Qing court swiftly approved his memorial 5 days later, yet the whereabouts of the Dalai Lama must still be accounted for. The Amban put out his tentacles everywhere to catch him, but by the time he was discovered, the Dalai Lama had already reached present-day Mongolia, Hal, thousands of miles away, far beyond his reach. A frustrated Amban reported to the throne. In the past few months, there has been no sign of him, despite repeated interrogations of Tibetan officials. An earlier message from the Xining Amban Junliang said that the Dalai Lama did not stay in the area of Xining. So you may or may not know, recently in the end of 2023, Qinghai, which is the area between Mongolia and Tibet, experienced some earthquakes. To get a better sense of the story and why it's geopolitically intriguing. Continuing reading from the Amban's report. Now, according to the report from Ganden Tripa, the responsible Kalong, and the monks and laity from the 3 large monasteries, I'm assuming the ones in Lhasa, the Dalai Lama has arrived around Urga. I guess this is a location in Mongolia. On 28th October 1904, Lian Shun, the general-in-chief in charge of Ulyatsai in western Mongolia, was shocked to learn from some Mongols that the Dalai Lama had arrived at the territory of Hal Mongolia, which was under his jurisdiction. Because there was no telegram connection with Ulyatsai, he had to send the news to Urga, or present-day Ulaanbaatar, about 1,000 kilometers away, by Imperial Horse Relay Postal Service, which was then telegraphed to Beijing. In his secret memorial to the throne on 4th December, Lian Shun said that on 7th November, his officials arrived at the Lamin Gegeni Dedlen Kid Monastery, where the Dalai Lama stayed, and learned that the Dalai Lama had fled with his seal to escape from the invading British. He bitterly complained that he did not get any official notice until 16th November, when he received a telegram from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs forwarded by the Amban in Orga, urging him to prevent the Dalai Lama from going further north. He said that on 1st December he was passed on a telegram from the governor of Shangan, forwarded by the governor of Xinjiang, present day, you can say East Turkestan, or the frontier of Central Asia and China, informing him of the Dalai Lama's arrival in Hal, Mongolia, noting that the Dalai Lama departed Caidam, the salt marsh region west of the Kokonur Lake in Qinghai, for Urga on 7th September 1904. Fearing that he might enter Russia via Urga, they ordered him to stop the Dalai Lama and persuade him to return to Qinghai. Lianshu was furious at such a poor supply of information. Your humble servant, Nu Cai, was especially alarmed and shocked upon reading this telegram. As is known, Tibet is 10,000 li away from Uliatsai and Orga. There is an imperial Amban in Tibet, and it borders Xinghai and neighbors with Gansu and Xinjiang. Dare I ask when exactly the British army entered Tibet, and when did the Dalai flee? Even if the governors and Ambans do not take precautions before the incident, how could it be that they still did not hear after the incident? Since the Dalai traveled alone on the grassland in Qinghai, Gansu, and Xinjiang, it might be difficult to intercept him. However, from Tibet to Urga, he must have passed through Qinghai and the border areas of Gansu and Xinjiang, where telegram communication works day and night. Even if he was not to be retained in the neighborhood, his travel should still have been known earlier, so that each place could prepare in advance. But why did it take so long as to wait until the second half of the 10th month, when the Dalai Lama had already arrived at Urga, that I was forwarded a telegram urgently ordering me to stop the Dalai Lama from entering Russia? End of report. Thus began the Qing knowledge of the 13th Dalai Lama's flight to Hal, Mongolia, and their belated and frantic attempts to bring him back to Tibet. From the time of his departure from Lhasa on 27th July 1904 and to his return on 21st December 1909, the 13th Dalai Lama was absent from his seat for over 5 years and 4 months. Just under 2 years of this period were spent in Hal, Mongolia, from early October 1904 to his crossing the border on 10th September 1906. The flight of the 13th Dalai Lama and his sojourn in Hal, Mongolia was a significant chapter in Tibet and Mongolia's modern history. A product of the Anglo-Russian Great Game, the 13th Dalai Lama's exile in Mongolia may look on the surface like an exemplification of the ancient tradition of the alliance between the Mongols and Tibetans dating back to the 13th century, which had been revived in the 16th and 17th centuries when the Dalai Lama and the Panchen institutions were established with the Mongol military support. However, Mongolia at the turn of the 20th century was no longer a Mongolia that could even handle its own internal affairs. In fact, the situation in Mongolia was no better than in Tibet, or perhaps even worse. The southern part of Mongolia, or Inner Mongolia, had by then become a battlefield between Mongols and Chinese settlers supported by the Manchu rulers to implement the so-called New Policy initiated in 1902. Hal Mongolia, or Outer Mongolia, was relatively tranquil, enjoying a more autonomous status than Inner Mongolia in the Qing order. But the Mongols there were also nervously watching the unfolding of events in the south, dispatching missions to St. Petersburg to sound out the possible Russian support in the event of Mongol independence. If there was one thing in common between Hal Mongolia and Tibet in 1904, then it was their common hope to rely on Russia. With the Manchu increasingly relying on the ethnic Chinese to save their ruling position in the Qing Empire, seeing their former Inner Asian allies as treacherous traitors, as they were willing to rely on external powers, the Qing imperial order in Inner Asia began to crumble. The 13th Dalai Lama's exile in Mongolia was widely known, but only as a mysterious event. Most of the existing discussions of him or the beginning of Tibetan modernity either skipped this episode or mentioned it in passing. Neither has the event occupied any significant chapter in Mongolian historiography. Yet we find the following paragraph in the formal petition to the Russian Tsar made by the 8th Jepsum Damba Kutuktu 1869 to 1924, and the four Khans of Hal Mongolia on 29th July 1911, seeking Russian support for Mongolia's liberation from Manchu Chinese oppression and for building an independent state of Mongolia. A few cunning officials using deceitful tricks occupied Tibet, the base of the yellow religion, meaning Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism, the only thing we uphold, and they threatened and forced out the Dalai Lama. They now oppress the Tibetans and take over everything as they please, making the yellow religion really worthless. Moreover, being insatiable, they have shown their wicked intent to put our Mongolia in the same situation as in Tibet. This is really regrettable and frightening. The reference to the driving out of the Dalai Lama must be about his flight to India in February 1910 to escape from a Qing invasion, as he was still in India at the time of the Mongol petition. But it must also be an allusion to his previous flight to Mongolia, about which the Mongols must still have a fresh memory. Indeed, the two flights of the Dalai Lama reminded them of their own plight in Qing China, thereby constituting one of the key reasons for the Mongols to proclaim independence on 29th December 1911 from the Qing dynasty. In other words, it was the Qing mistreatment of the highest spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism that caused the highest offense to the Mongols, who were deeply Buddhist at the time. In 1922, a Chinese historian, Chen Chongzu, wrote, "When in the 33rd year of the Guangxu reign, Empress Dowager Xiaoqing decreed to strip the Dalai Lama of Tibet of his title for secretly making a futile attempt to collude with Britain, and after the copy of the order issued to the Amban in Tibet for investigating and arresting him reached Urga, everybody from the Jeptun Damba down was scared. They said that if even such a powerful person as the Dalai Lama was mistreated by the state like this, what else could people like the Jeptun Damba do? It is really difficult to describe such a situation of like grieving for like." They then quickly tried to find a way for resistance. The first evidence for the strengthening of their army was the stockpiling of numerous weapons and ammunitions in the temple near the river the Jeptun Damba used to live in. His disloyalty emanated from this. End of report. If this observation is correct, then we need to rewrite the history of early modernity for both Mongolia and Tibet, not in separation, but in connection. And the following pages, the historian goes into detail about how the Tibetan nascent awakening of nationalism established its links through the 13th Dalai Lama with Mongolia, and we will save that for tomorrow's episode. Thanks for listening.